Thank you. Thank you very much. Um, and let me formally introduce Malcolm. I'd like to welcome a man who I'm a huge fan of, lucky enough to know. He's always fascinating from all of his books. And Revisionist History, if you haven't listened to the podcast, it's so good, you guys. Malcolm Gladwell, welcome, Malcolm.
Thank you. Thank you.
Live talks.
Thank you for, I was at the Ringer offices where you're home based this afternoon.
I know.
And I was talking to Bill Simmons, our kind of patron saint.
Yes.
And Bill said, well, what's Larry going to talk about? And there was a long pause, and I was like, I don't know, it could be just about the Lakers for all I know.
It could be.
It could
be. Yeah. I know you have a lot of opinions about sports. We can talk about running, you know. You've been challenging like people to running and that kind of stuff. Too.
I challenged LeBron, and
you challenged LeBron to a race.
Did you not know about this? You have to be in the running world, which is this big.
Right.
It was a big deal. I challenged LeBron to a 1 mile race.
1 mile.
Yeah.
Right.
And then thereupon the running community began a fierce debate about who would win.
Yeah. I love how people had this fight for you guys. Too,
yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah, no, it's fantastic. Yeah. My position was that he would win because even though
wait, back up for a second. You challenge him to a race, he's like, you're gonna probably win.
No, I'm not playing him.
Okay.
I legitimately think so. So LeBron is what, 280. I'm 125. So
you're one of his legs, basically.
I have it in running, of course, and it's an advantage to be ludicrously skinny as I am.
Especially on distance.
Especially on distance.
Sprints, you never know.
That being said, every now and again, and not infrequently, there are basketball players who are possessed of extraordinary aerobic engines. And I saw, and all runners did, a video that LeBron posted on his Instagram where he just runs. He's in a gym, and he's running back and forth between each end of each basket. Right. And someone will throw him the ball as he approaches the basket, an alley-oop. He dunks it, runs to the other end, dunks it, runs to the other end. It goes on forever. And if you look at it as a runner, you go like, holy mackerel, this guy can run like a 4:30 mile. So I saw that, and I was like, well, he's going to beat me, but how great would it be to be destroyed by LeBron in a mile?
I love that it took that evidence to convince you that...
No, runners need evidence. So there's some...
It's LeBron James, though.
No.
He's a machine.
He is a machine. But there are some basketball players who, by virtue of their size, would have difficulty running a mile. But do you remember a basketball... I don't know why we're on this tangent.
No, this is great. Yeah.
Do you remember Vernon Maxwell?
Of course, absolutely.
Of course.
Played for the Rockets.
So I met a guy who Vernon played for the University of Florida, as I believe. Mm-hmm. And he said they used to do this thing where they would have to show up at like 6 o'clock in the morning and a coach would make them run half a mile. And Vernon would show up hungover in like a pair of jeans and he would run a 2-minute half mile.
Right.
And he never did any kind of training. And that, he was not a small dude, right? Mm-hmm. So the idea is and Larry Bird had amazing.
See, I'm thinking that could have just been a high thing, where he's just running, he doesn't know what's going on.
No, he was a superb. Anyway, my point is LeBron, I think, is in the category of very, very large people who are so aerobically gifted they can beat skinny people. I
personally think LeBron just doesn't like to lose. And he's like, Kobe Bryant, you could challenge him to anything. He's going to find a way to win. Some people are just made up like that, which kind of transcends even the thing that they're good at.
Oh, he's not going to lose to me.
No, he's not going to
I'm also twice his age, let's be clear.
Yeah.
But
No, I'm clear about that, Malcolm. I did not challenge him to the race.
Every time I meet someone who works for either the Lakers or Nike, I badger them on this point.
Right.
Like, what's the matter with him? What's up with LeBron? Why is he ducking me? And then...
Yes.
When it was clear he wasn't going to do it, I was like, all right, let's have our moms race.
I like that. And what did he say?
My mom is 89 years old. So there's a similar age differential with his mom.
Right.
But Joyce is up for it.
And she's probably a beast, too.
She's going to use a walker.
She could kick some butt,
but like,
though,
I
bet,
think
with
that's
that
fine.
walker,
If you're young,
yeah.
you'd like to use the walker.
I wouldn't bet against your mom, man.
She has some velocity with the walker.
I bet she does. All right, let's talk about your excellent book, Talking to Strangers, What We Should Know About the People We Don't Know. There you go, guys. Came out last week. Get this book. You will be happy that you did. It's so fascinating on so many different levels, Malcolm.
Thank you.
Congratulations. You start by talking about Sandra Bland.
Yeah.
Sandra Bland was the black woman who was driving in Texas, and she was pulled over. There's this kind of, I almost said kerfuffle. Black people don't have kerfuffles with police. Yeah. Not the right word.
I was going to say.
It kind of underplays what exactly happened. Yeah.
I was like, you've been on the west side of LA too long.
Yes, exactly.
It's like a kerfuffle.
She had a kerfuffle. You're in Riverside. You get, well, what happened, Larry? They just had a kerfuffle. I don't understand. Yeah. I know.
This goes back to the Rodney King kerfuffle of.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. You know, people don't understand. That's why they got off. It was just a kerfuffle.
Can I say seriously before we
Yes.
start this? I was thinking about this the other day, that the history of lot of racial relations in Los Angeles is defined by a series of encounters between white policemen and black people. So there's a
And
timeline.
riots.
And what?
And riots.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, the end in, but
Right.
so the Watts riots begin when a young black man is stopped by a cop on suspicion of DWI, right? And his mom comes and there's a whole confrontation. Then the next big event is Eula Love. It's a famous case from the late 60s.
Right.
Where is a black woman who has a confrontation with police and they shoot her dead, right?
Yeah.
Because they think she's threatening them. Then there is Rodney King, right? Which happens sort of 15 years after that. It's like, I'm quite sure we could go back in time,
Yeah.
and I'm quite sure the next major conflagration will be about. It is extraordinary how many times in American history this particular kind of encounter has been the trigger for and some kind of explosion of unhappiness or unrest.
It's interesting because you obviously didn't find this out recently. You've known this, even as a Canadian, but of course as a man of the world. And yet the Sandra Bland incident seems like it affected you in a different way.
Yeah.
That kind of motivated this book. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, because it's so unbelievably. I mean, they're all senseless, these things. So we had the string. Starts with Ferguson, and then we have, and there's like 10 of them, right? Eric Garner. It's amazing how many of those names still.
The Sandra Bland is a little different because,
different.
for those of you that don't remember, 3 days later, I think it was, she was found hung in her jail cell. I'll say found hung because some people don't know if it was suicide or something else.
I think it was suicide.
Yeah.
And it's also different because, unlike, say, Ferguson, where we're still arguing about what happened, the whole encounter between Sandra Bland and the police officer who stopped her is captured on his dash cam.
Right.
We have a transcript, and you can watch the video online. And I've watched it, 50 times.
Yeah, we covered it on my show at the time, the nightly show.
I mean, it's so you can see just how insanely senseless and stupid and heartbreaking this encounter is. And that maybe sets it apart because it's always, for bad reasons, largely, when we get the videotape, I've always puzzled about this, by the way. Like Ray Rice.
Right. I know where you're going, yeah.
We get told that he hit his girlfriend
Sure.
really hard and dragged her from the elevator, and we're like, okay. And then we see the video, and we're like, oh my God!
What?
Right? Well, what's the difference? Like, why is it? There was another case with a guy at there's actually numerous cases of this over the last couple of years where we somehow can't get energized until we see the video. Donald Sterling.
Yeah.
So everybody knows that Donald Sterling, the owner of the Clippers, was a deeply racist dude. Twice the Department of Justice comes after him for not renting to black people. He's clearly a kind of person who in private, all the players would say, over a course of many, many years, the man is despicable in the way he behaves towards us. And then we get audio tape from his girlfriend of him behaving in precisely the manner we knew he behaved.
Right.
And everyone, the league is in an uproar, and he gets turfed out of his job. So it's like, I do not understand this, although I understand that I am the exact same way with Sandra Bland. The average number of civilians who are shot every year in America by police is 1,000. So there are roughly 1,000 cases we can get riled up about every year in America.
When you say shot, are you saying unjustly shot?
No.
Or are you just saying shot in, let's say, maybe in self-defense, or are you making a distinction
So
between...
the universe, it's complicated because there are lots and lots of fatal, but it is, I think the criterion is, in a situation where the civilian is not obviously or directly threatening so if I hole up in my house with a shotgun and the cops break in and I fire and they fire, that doesn't count. We're talking about situations that should not have ended in, it's about 1,000 people a year. So there are 1,000 times we can get upset, but we get most upset about the one case where we can actually see the videotape, right? It's a weird thing about us that we require that kind of documentary evidence before.
Well, it affects us in a different way, and you talk about this deeply into your book on the different points, but there's something about maybe it's not wanting to believe the worst in some cases. And in other cases, the Sandra Bland thing is interesting, and when you talk about cops pulling over blacks, it's interesting because there's the racism part of it is in the mix there sometimes, I think. Sometimes not, but in this book, talking to strangers, you're not really talking about that aspect of it, right? You're really talking about something else.
Yeah. Actually, this is something that it's worth kind of dwelling on a little bit. I explicitly don't explore the racial dimension of this.
I wanted to point
detail.
that out. That's not what you're extrapolating here.
And there's many reasons. One, the principal one, there's two that I want to talk about. The principal one is, I read an essay written by a black historian at Chicago called Charles Payne, which is called The Whole United States is Southern. And it is one of the most extraordinarily insightful and devastating essays I've ever read, in which he makes this argument that was a statement made by George Wallace in, I think, the early 70s. He was governor, of course, of Alabama, a famous segregationist.
Who later had an epiphany, supposedly, turned around.
Yes.
Yeah.
He later kind of transformed himself
it was kind of interesting,
into a kind
First people to forgive him were black people, too. like he was cool with black people. It's a very interesting story.
Yeah, it is actually fascinating.
Wallace story,
But this is bad George Wallace.
Right, this is bad
He's just
George
done a series of...
Just like, I still hate you black people, George Wallace.
Yeah, that's right. And he has done, I've forgotten what the trigger is. He's done something totally racist. And he was remarking on the fact that he got all these...
He woke up, right, yes.
that he got all these letters of support from across America. And the reason he made that comment is that this is Payne's argument, the great project of segregationists, of white segregationists in the 1960s and 50s and 60s in the South was, actually more than that, was to personalize racism, was to say what racism is about is that you and me, Larry, we don't see eye to eye. We have hatred in our heart, and if a white person and a black person can say, although I'm not, of course, white person, so in this case, I'm standing in for, because I'm whiter than you, I'll stand in for the white person.
Yeah.
Am I white? I am whiter than you.
Well, you were in Canada for so fucking long. How are you supposed to get any darker than you are right now? It's all going to be temporary melanin.
Yeah, I know. I've maxed out on the Canadian
you can't get
scale.
permanent melanin at this point. You're just borrowing it whenever you get tans.
It's true. It's true. What he means is, so back to George Wallace.
Yes.
That the great project of the Southern racist was to transform the racial argument into a personal argument. So to forget about institutionalized racism, to forget about voter suppression and segregation, all those kinds of things, and to say, it's about you and I need to feel love in our hearts towards one another, right? And so long as the argument is framed in personal terms, they win. so long as when people talk about it in institutional terms, they lose. And Wallace was saying, after he got this sort of outpouring of emotion for something that he said, oh my God, we won. They're thinking about it in totally personal terms. It's all about, is the other two people involved in the conversation racists in their heart? It's not about the fact that we don't let black people vote, right? And what's amazing, this prism of thinking about racism, is that he's totally right. They won, right? So the governor of Virginia wears blackface, and it's like a 1 month long story. Everyone's up in arms, as if it's somehow surprising that a dude in his 60s who went to UVA in the 1970s wouldn't have worn blackface at some point. I mean, it was probably, he probably needed to do that to get in. Right? It was probably like why is how is this surprising?
Yes, frankly, I'm not that impressed. That's kind of some weak racism as far as I'm concerned.
It's like
you can do better than that. Come on.
It is amateur hour racism.
Right.
Meanwhile, in exactly the same moment in history, we're coming out of an election where there is clear evidence that both gerrymandering and voter suppression substantially altered the outcome of the 2016 elections. That and the Ralph, whatever his name is, blackface story, are on a par. And George Wallace would say, oh my God, we won. Like, you're really considering blackface along with voter suppression and gerrymandering, right? That's what they want. They want it to be elevated. So what I was trying to get away with in that story is, and I felt people were dismissing the story of Sandra Bland and the cop by saying, oh, the cop's a racist. And that ended the discussion. And I don't want to end the discussion. I was like, all right, well, sure, maybe he is, but can we somehow find a way to talk about this that doesn't foreclose some kind of systematic reaction to the problem?
Yeah, one of the things I've always said that, not all the times people are racist. I think the benefit of the doubt is racist itself. The actual benefit of the doubt, it's the one benefit that white people get in droves, that nobody gets. But it's that assumption that is made. You talk about this in Blink a little bit, the assumption that's made from the beginning. And further in your book, when you talk about policing, especially in Kansas City, many times police make an assumption based on skin color. I'm not saying they're racist, but there's an assumption that's made that can inform their behavior to a certain extent. Not all cops are like this. I certainly don't want to say that. But in the Sandra Bland case, it felt like that was I felt there was some female stuff going in there too, like, this bitch is talking to me, oh my God, that kind of thing. Like it seemed like he couldn't believe a woman was talking to him like that.
Yeah.
That's what it felt like to me. I was getting some of that. Like, how dare she
Oh, there's so many layers to that.
There's so many layers, right?
She's out-of-state plates,
right.
A woman, black. And I keep saying this because I'm a car person. I love cars. She's driving a Hyundai. I'm not saying that trivially.
Now it explains it, yes.
No, I mean, I really do think it's part of it. He's like...
You think the Hyundai is part of it?
Yeah. I know, it sounds absurd. It sounds absurd. But so what are the circumstances under which he does not stop her? Okay? So if she's white, way lower chances he stops her, right? If she's not 28 but 68,
sure,
way lower chances.
Right.
And if she's driving a Mercedes, he doesn't stop her if she's driving a Mercedes, right?
Right.
So he's like looking at a car and he's saying, oh, it's like not a nice car. It's like a Hyundai. And it's got Chicago plates. And there's a young black woman in it. And I don't know, that's like, I'm in small town in rural Texas. And that just seems weird to me, right? And by the way, as I point out in the book, they are trained to do that. That is... They are trained to look for anomalies. She is anomalous in Prairie View, Texas in that moment. She's not fitting the template of a normal motorist. Sure. And he has 3 triggers. She's a pickup truck. It's a different story.
No Confederate flag.
No Confederate. If she was somehow, by some extraordinary act of self-hatred, putting the Confederate flag in the back of the truck, yeah, like she walks, right? She escapes. But he's putting all those kind of pieces together, and then the whole thing unravels. But what's interesting about that is that the problem with the tape with watching a tape and obsessing over the tape, and I thought about this a lot because I'm someone who obsessed about the tape, is the tape suggests that the interaction fails at the moment that he confronts her for the first time.
For the first time, when he's asking for her license and registration.
So the tape begins, and you see him pull her over and walk up to the passenger side and lean in and say, blah, blah, blah. But of course, it doesn't begin there. It begins before he pulls her over. It begins when he sees her pull onto the street, and he drives up behind her. And it's really, really important to understand that his complete misunderstanding and the paranoid fantasy that he constructs around Sandra Bland does not begin when he actually meets Sandra Bland. It begins before he meets her, right? That's the thing. That's the crazy thing. He's not even, I mean, one of the theses of this book is that we're really bad at talking to strangers. Why? Because a lot of times we're in a hurry and we use really lousy evidence as the basis for. He's in such a hurry that he has already formed a suspicion about her before he has even laid eyes on. I mean, he's seen her glancingly as she drives by, and he's like, Chicago plates, black woman, she got a problem. And then he manufactures a reason for pulling her over. That's part of what is profoundly creepy about it.
And you're saying that affected the entire conversation?
Yeah.
Okay, now, do you also, I don't remember if you do, but do you also look at it from the other side? Like, what has she made up in her mind about him? Because had she been posting things about incidents with police?
She's aware, a politically aware young woman.
Right, so there was obviously a narrative playing in her head as well, right?
Yeah.
How much credence do you give to that, like in this situation?
Well, so on the other side of this argument, there are those who will make a lot out of that, and they'll say, well, if she had just, said, yes, sir, no, sir, yes, sir, no, sir, she's alive today. To which I would say several things. One is that she is legitimate. First of all, she's had a series of encounters with the cops before, and she has several $1,000s in unpaid traffic fines from previous police stops. That is part of the reason she has moved from Chicago to Texas, is to start her life over, because she was deeply in debt. She had psychiatric problems. She'd attempted suicide. She had lost a child. Her life had really been in tatters in Chicago, and she wanted a new start. So she comes down to Texas, and then one day into Texas, she gets a new job. She thinks she's turned over a new leaf, and a cop pulls her over. And here's the thing, though, and the reason why I don't buy this argument that she's in some way to blame. The cop pulls her over for completely bullshit reasons. She pulls out of Prairie View University, and she's driving down the road. He pulls in behind her, accelerates up behind her. So what does she do? She gets out of as one would do if a cop accelerates behind you, right? She gets out of his way, and she doesn't use her turning signal because she's in a hurry to get out of a police car who's driving really quickly. And then he stops her and says, you didn't use your turning signal.
He's not wrong.
No. It's like she's incensed, and legitimately, if anyone did that to you, and particularly she's someone who was trying to start over after having...
Yeah, she had her own things going on. She may have been suffering from some kind of depression or something.
Oh, I think
there were some issues going on with
I think
her.
absolutely.
Absolutely.
But the trigger is the cop completely manufactures a pretext for pulling her over, and that quite properly irritates her. But it doesn't... If you watch the videotape, it's not like she's screaming at him. She's not misbehaving. She is complying, and all she does is light a cigarette. By the way, why do people light a cigarette? To calm their nerves. She's trying to de-escalate.
Although that is pretty ballsy to light up a cigarette while the cop's giving you a ticket.
I don't know.
I mean, that's pretty ballsy.
Do not agree. I think...
Really? Have you think just, you're giving me a ticket, officer? Hold on one second.
No, it's...
In fact, let me just finish this blunt while you're talking.
No, because... No, but it's not that. It is... I am very upset.
Right.
I would like to calm myself down. And it's more, nicotine in the day. Nicotine is an extraordinarily powerful drug with many effects. One of its effects is it is an anxiety reducer, a very powerful anxiety reducer.
Sure, absolutely.
And she is, in her mind, I believe, she's signaling to the police officer, I'm upset, just let me calm down.
She's trying to calm down, right.
She's trying to calm down, and she's trying to, and by calming herself down, trying to de-escalate the situation. And he sees it as an act of defiance, right? So another one of his ludicrous misreadings of the situation.
Well, let me ask you this, and then I want to move on to some of the other things in here. But I find that cops generally don't like it when you give them what they call attitude. They just don't. I mean, cops that I talk to, my father was in law enforcement. If you give them what they consider attitude, I'm not saying it was attitude, but what they consider, it just turns them into like, fuck you, motherfucker, this is going to be difficult now. That's one thing that I definitely know.
I didn't know your dad was a cop.
He wasn't a cop, he was a probation officer, but he was LA County Sheriff's. And my experience is that my father always had a badge. He still has it to this day. Yeah. And when he's got pulled over several times when we were in the car, as soon as he shows the badge, the blue color takes over from the black.
Yeah.
You know? And it was all good. So that was my experience, that, man, that badge is pretty fucking powerful, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
So it's kind of an interesting point of view. But in the book, you talk a lot about spies and how I find this stuff very fascinating because part of what you cover in the book is how we like to believe, I don't know, I'm not saying the same thing in the book, but we kind of believe the best in people, or we want to believe the truth about something. Yeah. And people can, it's harder to tell when people are lying to us than it is when they're telling the truth. Is that fair?
Our assumption is that people are always telling us the truth.
It's kind of our base assumption, right? But we really, really want to believe that as well, too, right?
Yes. And so it's difficult. So it takes an awful lot of evidence for us to shift out of what's called truth default mode into the belief that you're being deceived. And this is an astonishingly universal observation about human behavior. So just by virtue of being someone who is deeply experienced or expert does not, that expertise and experience does not mean that you are better at knowing when you're being deceived. All of us do it. I mean, I tell a story in the book of the Larry Nasser case at Michigan State.
Oh, it's terrible. The guy who molested the gymnast.
The gymnast.
Yeah,
you know, there were parents who were there's one story with a mom who is herself a doctor, is in the room while Nasser is treating her daughter, and he's got his fingers inside her daughter's vagina, and he has a hard-on. And the mom, the doctor, sees that Larry Nasser has a erection.
The parent sees it? Is that what you mean?
The parent.
The parent.
Looks at Larry Nasser, the doctor, and sees that he is sporting an erection while treating her daughter. And she was like, I saw it, and I was like, that's kind of weird. Why would he? Right? Now, this is not someone who is a bad parent, an idiot, an inexperienced person. None of those things. She is a deeply caring parent who is a medical doctor who ought to know, but that fundamental desire, human desire to see the best in people, overcomes all of her doubts, right? And that happens across the board.
It's fascinating because, and you talk about this in different ways. Like there are two ways to me that this is kind of expressed. There's the liar, in that sense, the person that is purposely putting out a lie, and people believe it because liars are actually pretty good, you know, especially professional liars, as we see one almost every day, right?
I don't think he's very good at it, though.
Yeah. Well, you know what it is? He's so horrible at lying, he's taken it to a meta level of lying. No, really, it really is unbelievable. I love that we don't have to say what we're talking about. No. I'm giving him credit. Yeah. He's the most unbelievable liar I've ever seen in my life, where the lies take on a different form of truth that he can pass any kind of polygraph. I guarantee you, hook that creature up to a polygraph, pass, on anything. He's an amazing machine of untruth.
This is sort of parenthetical, but when I was doing this book, none of it made it into the book, but I became really interested in polygraph. And the CIA has they deeply believe in the polygraph.
They use it regularly, right?
Oh my God, more than regularly. They're obsessed with it. They have a whole department of dozens and dozens of people. And as far as I can tell, everyone who ever retired from the CIA's polygraph division wrote a memoir.
That's hilarious.
And so I began to collect the memoirs of ex-CIA polygraph experts. And they're all weird doesn't quite capture it. It's like you're doing something that has no scientific basis for an organization like the CIA, and then you retire, and the first thing you do is write a memoir boasting about how good you were at this thing that is completely horseshit.
Right.
So then I thought, well, I'll go and visit them. So I began to visit them. And they are, when they tell stories about their triumphs, it's never that I caught the spot. I caught Aldrich Ames before he gave away every secret we ever had. It's never that, because they don't catch Aldrich Ames.
Right.
It's always like, there was this guy, and he was like having an affair with his wife. I caught him. You're like, okay. Like,
right.
Or like this guy, I mean, he said that he was straight, but he was gay. Incredible percentage of their wins are that they uncover that someone is gay. I'm like, first of all, it's 2019. I don't understand, like, what's the win here? How was this difficult?
So you're proud
when
of
I
your
want to find out
gaydar
whether someone
or
is gay,
something?
generally I just ask them, are you gay?
Yeah, that would be the best.
I don't have to hook them up to some machine.
Right.
But they have lowered
Or
the
you
bar.
can ask them out. That'd be the other way, too, right?
I'm worried. If you lower the bar far enough, everything's a win, right? That's essentially what they're
Once
doing.
again, yes.
But I visited more than one of them, and I was just so and they were all sort of perversely proud of their record. And then they would always have some story about how, yeah, I told those fools on the Eastern European desk not to trust so-and-so. It's like,
After the fact.
it's all just not. Anyway, I don't know why I was going on that. None of it made the book, because I was like, why would I?
Right. Why do you think the people who are most responsible, like people in the CIA, who are, the people who are supposedly the experts at subterfuge, are the people who probably get fooled the most? I mean, they fall hard. Like you talk about, it took years to just figure out who double agents are. Like, why is it so hard to figure out who a double agent is? From an organization whose job it is
To figure out double agent.
Exactly. That's what I mean.
So the book begins with the story. I don't want to ruin it, but I tell this unbelievable story about the Cubans and
Yes.
how the Cubans tricked the
Tease it
United
a little
States.
bit, but it's a really fascinating
A
story.
guy who's high up in Cuban intelligence shows up in 1987, defects, presents himself at the American embassy in Vienna and says, I have a story to tell. And he insists that the former CIA station chief in Havana be present when he tells the story. And this is a very famous spy called the Mountain Climber, who I spent about a year and a half trying to find and finally found. He's like the greatest CIA operative of his generation.
And what year did this happen?
87.
Okay, right, late
So
80s.
the Mountain Climber is now retired. I can't use his real name. He's a legend.
Mountain Climber.
His nickname was the Mountain Climber, El Alpinista. The KGB would teach courses on El Alpinista to their recruits, because he was like the real deal. And I found it was actually kind of great. So I spent like so much time trying to find him, because I was like, I got to hear this story, because I was told every time I would try and ask some CIA person, tell me the story about what happened when this dude defected. They go, you got to talk to the mountain climber. So it's like, what do you do when someone says you got to talk to the mountain climber?
Right.
Like,
Got to find the mountain
you
climber.
can't Google mountain climber.
Right.
But I in fact found him. I was so pleased with it, because I'm actually quite a bad reporter, and the fact that I found him was like heroic on my part.
Can you share
literally
how he found him, or is that like a secret information how you found him?
can't tell you.
Okay, all right.
But one day I wake up, and there's a voicemail, and I listen to the voicemail. Literally, it is, Mr. Gladwell, I hear you're looking for me. It's the mountain climber. I was like, oh my God!
It would have been great had you not been home and it's on your voicemail. Hello, this is the mountain climber. You were looking for me?
El Alpinista. Anyway, the mountain climber tells this kind of epic story, and you realize that even mountain climber, the greatest operative of his generation, even he can be fooled. And this is always, all spy stories are the same, which is the spy is not James Bond, they're kind of lame, and they start to spy,
Right.
and 5 years in, someone suspects them, and they get past their flying colors, and then 10 years in, even though they're like, Aldrich James, the worst spy of his generation, did everything possible to be caught. He was like drunk all the time. Soviets start paying him large amounts of cash, which he starts to spend, even though he's like GS7. You know what I mean? Like he's showing up at Langley in like a brand new, XJ12 Jaguar. Like, and everyone's like,
Hey,
Aldrich.
everybody, what's going on?
And then like, my favorite thing is they all make a big deal about how he capped his teeth. So you get the sense that like the CIA is a place where nobody caps. No one caps their teeth here at the agency. All of a sudden, like, Aldrich James like shows up in the XJ12 and like gets out and like his teeth are gleaming white. It's like you would think this is like
And no suspicion.
no suspicion,
Right.
none. He
He's
gets
just
caught-
crazy.
He's just crazy Aldrich. He marries like a woman who like has ties to, but it's just like, or even I read this is not in the book, but I read this book recently over the holidays about Klaus Fuchs, who's the spy who gives away all the atomic secrets to the Soviets in the 40s. Arguably the most damaging spy of the 20th century. And Klaus Fuchs is at Los Alamos, because he's one of the top nuclear physicists in the world. And he has to get so everything he's learning, so they're inventing the nuclear bomb, and Klaus is central. It's like Oppenheimer, Klaus. And Klaus is working for the Soviets the whole time. So he has to get the stuff to the Soviets. Now, so Los Alamos is like 20,000 people there, but it's on lockdown. You can't leave Los Alamos for obvious reasons, because it's the biggest secret in the world, right? We're trying to make an atomic bomb, so you can't, so it's like big fence around. To get out of it, it's harder than to get out of God knows what. Klaus is like constantly leaving for like unexplained. They're like, where's Klaus? I don't know what Klaus. I don't know where he's gone. He's like gone out in the desert somewhere. Like nobody. It's just this incredible thing. It's like
His pants are real puffy. I don't know what's going on there. Maybe he's gaining weight. Yeah, I don't know.
And they're so far. At the end, Klaus gets caught, and he ends up in East Germany. And the British he's British. They're really bummed that they lost him. This is just how weird and surreal the world of spies is. Like, so the guy, the whole time that he's figuring out how to make an atomic bomb, he's giving everything to the Russians.
Sure.
We know this about him. We then the Brits then have to give him up, and he goes to East Germany, lives out his days. And their first thought is, such a shame to have lost Klaus, because their whole position is, all right, I know he gave everything to the Russians, but we can't make a bomb without him. I don't have the time or the energy to unpack the logic behind that particular.
It's unbelievable how people compartmentalize their common sense. Common sense gets compartmentalized. So the biggest example in this book, and this is an area that I've been interested in for a long time too, is how does Neville Chamberlain, at the dawn of the Second World War, think, I think I believe that Hitler guy. How does he look Hitler in the eye and comes away several times, not just once, with complete faith in him? I mean, not complete faith, but he presents it that way. Because, people were very scared about the prospect of war at that time. Hitler had already done a couple of things. How does that happen? How does that phenomena happen?
Well, not only that, Hitler has written a 900-page manifesto detailing in bullet point form exactly what he wants to do.
It couldn't be clear. He's already written it.
He has the agenda, and it's like he's kind of spelled it all out. All you have to do is read the book.
Yes, exactly.
And Chamberlain decides, no, actually, I'm going to fly to Munich. And every part of the flight I don't know, he'd never been in an airplane before, Neville Chamberlain. He flies to Munich. And half of the whole story is like the Brits celebrating him for his bravery, flying to Munich from London. And he meets Hitler.
Like he's Lindbergh or something? Or?
There's some, he flies from some aerodrome. Is that what they called it back then? Where is Neville Chamberlain from?
No.
He's he's a shopkeeper from Manchester.
Right.
And he has this notion, by the way, not dissimilar to George Bush looking George Putin in the eye and saying, I have seen into this man's soul. and
I've
trust
seen
him."
his soul. I've looked in it.
That's really good.
I think he was eating some eggs and sausage. And I figured he must be regular. He's a good guy.
One of us. Why is George Bush?
So,
George Bush got a pass. He got a pass from history that I will never understand.
do you think he got a pass?
Oh my God!
Okay. I don't think he got a pass.
He got a pass.
When did he get a pass?
He starts a war for a completely fictionalized reason, which results in hundreds of thousands of people dying and an entire generation of war vets coming home damaged for the rest of their lives. And you can see them on the streets. And why are they on the streets? Because George Bush started a war for no reason, right? And then not to mention the devastation that is left over in Iraq because we started a war for no reason, right? And somehow this doesn't matter. And we're obsessing about Trump's tweets. When there's a guy in Texas.
You know who's against that war? Your boy Trump.
I don't think Trump is nearly as egregious as George Bush. I don't think it's even close.
Really?
Yeah, I think Bush is in a cat. He started a war on the basis of a lie, a complete falsehood,
Okay.
right? Which he told to the American people that had nothing to do with 9/11, which devastated tens of thousands of lives, cost $1 trillion, and left a generation of American soldiers devastated and wounded. And somehow he's perceived as this genial guy down in Texas, like painting pictures and giving speeches for, this is like, what is the matter with us? There is nothing Donald Trump has done that even comes close to the human devastation of George Bush's time. Not even close. Not even close.
Right.
I mean, Trump is a deeply objectionable figure, but he has not resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands of people for no reason.
Right.
Right? George Bush is I don't know why I'm on this. I feel very sure this. He's a war criminal. He's a classic example of that is what a war criminal is. Someone who enters into a disastrous conflict for no good reason, right? Not worse than no good reason, for a completely trumped up, ridiculous reason.
Well, the entire government was complicit in that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't know. That's another side thing. But it's like weird.
I think I know what your next book is.
As a non-American, I have to say, I am the choice of things that Americans get riled up about has always amazed me. You're like, this guy is like, you're fine with that guy.
Yes.
He's considered to be the voice of reason.
Well,
Sorry.
No. I was just asking about Hitler, and Hitler takes you to all kinds of places.
I read this great book when I was doing that thing on Hitler by Hitler's PR
No,
guy.
but I love that you didn't get as mad about Hitler as you did about George Bush. I love that.
Oh, I'm plenty mad about Hitler.
Yeah, you were.
I mean, you don't want to
kind of
get started
wistful
on Hitler?
about Hitler. Oh, that Hitler.
I'm going to do a revisionist history episode next season on Hitler's PR guy. And I'm not going to tell you the story, which is because it'll ruin the
His
episode.
PR guy.
He's a PR guy.
You mean like Lenny Riefenstahl, or?
No, way worse. I'm only going to say this about his PR guy. Ready? Went to Harvard.
Really?
My antipathy towards Harvard is well known. And this is just icing on the cake.
This is a ridiculous connection you're making right now.
Did you go to Harvard, Barry?
No, I didn't go to Harvard.
Where did you go?
I went to Cal Poly Pomona. I'm a local.
Nice.
Come on, man. Loco boy. That's a theater major.
I don't know why I had you for one of those fancy guys.
No, I'm not this Harvard elitist. Yeah. I did do PR for Hitler's grandson, though. I just have to say. I feel really bad about that. I probably shouldn't have done it. But he seems to have cleaned up the family name, is all I can say. No, I was, Cal Poly was an agricultural engineering school, which explains why I was a theater major there. So
yes, that's right.
That's why I was cool. Cal Poly, man.
That's called the path
UC
of least
Riverside,
resistance.
very fine school out here, by the way. I just want to say, we're at Riverside. Anyhow, you're making your point about Harvard, your hatred for Harvard, because.
Well, I mean, when Hitler's PR guy.
Right.
Anyway, the story I'm going to tell on my podcast
Yes.
episode on this, which is yet to come. I can't tell you because you won't listen to the episode. But let me just say there is shocking Harvard-related twist to this story.
I can't wait. I'm always waiting for a Harvard-related twist with bated breath. I want you to know. It's what I live for. There's one thing. Oh, you know what I want to talk about in your book? When you get to you come back to the Sandra Bland at the end, and there's a lot of points that you make. You have Friends in this book, which is real fascinating. I still don't know why the show Friends is in this book. I have no idea if you want to talk about it. But it's
You got to mix it up.
It's fascinating to read. You got to look at it. But there is an issue in here that kind of goes outside of this a little bit, but you bring it back in, and it's called coupling.
Yes.
This term, I haven't quite heard this term before, and it's kind of a phenomena how things can be related, the way that they occur together, I guess, and you use suicides as a way to demonstrate it, right? But why is coupling such a powerful thing in the observation of how we treat people?
So coupling is this idea which begins really is developed very fully by a generation, a very recent generation of criminologists who begin to understand that what crime is not the actions of an individual, but rather what crime is an actions of an individual coupled with a context, with a place.
Okay.
So a good way to illustrate this is is if you were LAPD chief and you were interested in lowering the crime rate in LA County, I could give you a choice of two sources of information.
I would get rid of all Hyundais first.
Yes.
Yes. Just saying.
I can either give you the names of every person who committed a crime in LA County over the previous year,
Okay.
or I can give you the addresses of every crime that was committed in LA County the previous year. Which do you think is more useful?
To stopping crime? Sounds like a trick question.
Well, the answer is obvious.
Probably the address is
Yes.
because you get an idea of where crime is occurring.
Exactly.
Right.
So this is the great insight of the couplist, that the places that crime occurs are more useful in understanding crime than the criminals themselves. So a criminal is not someone who commits a crime out of context. They commit a crime coupled to a very, very, very specific place. And when you do maps of crimes in cities, this is a great insight, you find that as a general rule, more than 50% of the crime in any urban area occurs on less than 5% of the street segments, in other words, the blocks, which is an extraordinary fact. So when I was doing the book, I did a tour of Baltimore, America's most dangerous city, with a criminologist who was trying to make this point to me. She was like, okay, we're now driving in West Baltimore, where The Wire is from, incredibly dangerous neighborhood.
Sure.
Most streets in West Baltimore have almost no crime. So even in one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in America, the crime is concentrated in a very, very, very small number of street segments, of one block segments.
Even when the assumption might be that it's kind of spread out.
So, and when cops have the assumption that crime is everywhere, they behave, the argument I'm sort of building is that they feel they have the right and the obligation to employ aggressive police tactics everywhere. But when they realize that in fact crime is something that is incredibly specific to very particular places, then you realize, oh no, the tactics that are appropriate on 95% of the street segments are not appropriate on the 5% where all the crime is, and vice versa. You can't police an entire city the same way. And to me, that is the most important lesson about the Sandra Bland case, which is, when I remember going to one of the guys who's made this argument, a guy named Larry Sherman, a brilliant criminologist who's been in the forefront of this movement. And we were walking through the Sandra Bland case, and the first thing he says is, what on earth is the cop stopping her at 2 o'clock in the afternoon? What he meant was, crimes do not occur at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, right? If you understand what criminality looks like, crimes occur in very specific neighborhoods, generally speaking, between the hours of X and Y at night.
Sometimes you have to make an appointment.
Yes, right. He was just like, so to do that is to court disaster. You are setting yourself up for pulling over an innocent person and making a false positive error, right? Of alienating someone for no good reason, who is not likely to be engaged in any kind of criminal activity. You have to, if you want to use aggressive police tactics, you have to use them incredibly sparingly and intelligently. And they're not doing that.
Can you define aggressive police tactics? You have I think in your book, the way you talk about it, there was the Kansas City experiment or whatever. And by aggressive, it means they would just pull people over on the slightest of whim. But the idea was to try to get guns off the streets.
Yeah.
That was the initial way that they were doing it, right? Which is kind of interesting to me because I don't remember like when this was happening, like the NRA, like crying that black people's guns were being taken away, or that type of thing. I don't recall that
They
at all.
were known. I don't remember them getting up in arms about that particular thing.
People are happy when black people get their guns taken away.
Black people's guns don't kill people. How would the NRA finish
Come on,
that? How would they finish that sentence?
Black people do.
No, the idea is that, so when you look at, it's kind of fascinating, this idea, it's called the law of criminal concentration, and this idea that crime happens overwhelmingly year after year on the same very specific, narrow set of streets. So it would, in a place like Baltimore, there might be a street segment, and a street segment is not an entire block, it is half of a block. It's just one side of the street between two streets, right? So there are street segments in Baltimore that might have 200 police calls in a year.
That's crazy.
Right? So their argument is if you happen to live on that street segment, you are totally fine with cops being there all the time, pulling people over all the time.
Sure.
Because
you don't have a problem with that, right? That, that aggressive policing is good.
You are terrified of going out. You can't step out of your door. You're living in Lebanon. It's like a nightmare. You want the cops there. If you live on a street segment, and most street segments in cities have almost no, one or two police calls a year. If you live there, you don't want the cops there all the time. All they're doing is harassing you, right? So there's a big difference between the attitude towards policing in those specific areas that are crime-ridden and in those vast majority of areas that are not. And so these guys, this guy named David Weisberg, who's the kind of genius of this, and Larry Sherman, their argument is you don't have a credibility problem for law enforcement when you limit yourself to the areas where crime is. You have a credibility problem when you start to get lazy and injudicious and use these tactics in places where where they aren't appropriate. That is, to my mind, the real lesson of Sandra Bland. What's he doing stopping? Leave aside what happens after he stops her. That's all secondary stuff. The real issue is, why is he stopping her, right? What are you doing? There is almost no chance she is up to no good.
Wow. One of the things I wanted to ask you about as well is now you're presenting your books in a whole new way. Like you do an audio version, really producing that. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? It sounds amazing.
So we did what we call an enhanced audiobook of this, which is, if you listen to the audiobook, it's produced like a podcast. So I did, when I was reporting this, I made sure that I got high quality tape on everyone I was interviewing. And then, so when we did the audiobook, for the first thing we did was, normally you just read everything. When I come to someone that I'm quoting, you hear them.
Yes.
And when I describe Sandra Bland at the beginning, you hear actual Sandra Bland. And at the very end, when I come back to the police officer and he's giving his deposition on his side of the story, you hear it in his voice. And then we went to Janelle Monáe. Janelle Monáe sang this incredible song about police shootings called Helm You Talking About. And we went to Janelle Monáe and we said, can we use the song? And she's like, absolutely. So the song, it's got this incredibly powerful song and we have it scored by this group we spent 6 months and a couple $100,000
That's crazy.
Making this. And I will say this, it's a better book in audio. It's a totally different book.
It's a whole different experience.
Completely different experience. And it's way more powerful. Once you hear, because Sandra Bland did this, she had a YouTube channel and she did all of these, you can find them online. She used to post these kind of like little kind of essays online.
Like video essays?
Video essays. And she would always begin, hello, my beautiful kings and queens. And you realize when you listen to them that what a kind of, she was a really kind of beautiful human being. She was not someone this is why I get so upset at people who suggest she was in some way culpable.
Like she really affected you, these tapes, and just listening
She
to
did.
her.
When you listen to them, you realize this is a woman who had an extraordinary amount of love and kindness in her heart. She has one talking about, really squarely about race, when she talks about how the solution to all of these, this is in the middle of that series of high-profile police shootings, and she's very much caught up in this. And she has this one YouTube essay where she talks about how the solution is not for black people to hate white people. That's just does not. And she talks about her own experience in a racially mixed high school, and it's incredibly affecting. And you realize this is an intelligent, thoughtful young woman. She's not like turning to the cop and going like this. That's not her, right? She's a very different kind of person. That's why this thing is one of the many, many reasons this thing is so heartbreaking.
Yeah.
That she's actually someone who wanted to bring some degree of civility and wisdom to this conversation.
It really is amazing. One of the things that, even hearing you speak about it now, I'm really struck by the level of emotion that you have about her in that case. And, to bookend her story with this, it's different. That's the way that this is different from other things you've read, the other things you've written. From my point of view, like you present a thesis to us and you develop that thesis over the course of the book. This is a little different. You're presenting a problem that I think, almost an emotional problem you had, something you're trying to work out. And the book is almost you working that out, and
Very
then
much, yeah.
Is that accurate?
I
or?
think that is.
It has a different level of emotion because of that. I'm fascinated to hear that audiobook though. That sounds like
when you hear
we get
her,
to experience almost the feelings that you're having about this, right?
And all of these stories, like there's the story of where I sit down with the guy who did all of the waterboarding for the CIA, and because torture is the ultimate talking to strangers, right? Right?
Yes, I suppose so.
You sit down with an Al Qaeda guy,
Yes.
and you are required to figure out what
Yeah.
what secrets he has, and he doesn't want to give them to you, and you have to find out who he is and what he knows.
Right.
And so the solution they had, I say they, I have to stop myself, because this was someone acting at the behest of the United States government. It's really, one of the issues I have with people's relationship to questionable or evil deeds done by the government is they try and distance themselves from it. It is really, this is a guy, we sat down with Al Qaeda and we attempted to use coercive measures to find out what they were thinking, right? And we decided that sleep deprivation and waterboarding and walling was an appropriate way to do that. And we have got to live with the consequences. And by the way, if the same situation were to come up now, we would be doing that again. If you think that this administration would be somehow more squeamish about using coercive interrogation than George Bush's administration was, you're crazy, right?
That I don't know, because this is where Trump is so unpredictable. Like, he's like, goes, "Oh no, don't do that." Like, he has these weird reactions to things, He really does. I believe he's unpredictable in that realm.
Yeah.
He might surprise you and be against torture. Honestly, I have no idea.
He has said he's in favor, but that means nothing,
But he's so unpredictable. He might be squeamish one day about it. I mean, who knows? So,
yeah.
Like, in other words, I don't believe he has an ideology. I believe he has a how he's feeling that day-ology.
No, I think that is
Right.
that is.
If the KFC is working hard against him that day, then I can see him coming out of that.
For a guy who's got like a kind of cleanliness fetish, he eats an awful lot of fast food. That's all I can say.
Yes. But actually, it's interesting about Trump, and, I rarely give him credit because, it's just too much fun to be against him. But he seems to have a soft spot in the criminal justice area, and maybe it's because of the people who have been coming to him about it or that type of thing. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But he has that hawkish defend the country thing about him, but there's this other area that is kind of interesting too.
Well, if you've broken as many laws as he has,
right,
you're going to have an antagonistic attitude.
Exactly. Criminals should go free.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
No, no. I was going to say
sense.
that in the audio book, it's one thing when in the physical book when you read about this CIA guy, but that whole chapter or half of it is told in his voice in the audiobook. It's just I back out entirely. It's just long stretches.
Mountain climber?
Not the mountain climber.
Oh, okay.
No, this is the CIA guy who did the you will hear him in his own voice describing what it's like to waterboard
I
someone.
was going to think if mountain climbers in there and he didn't know.
Mountain climber in the corner.
You have me in your book? What?
He tells the CIA interrogator guy, torture guy, tells a story, which is admittedly is kind of funny, which is he is his buddy, and they want to figure out whether they want to waterboard people, but they're from. So there's two dueling. They're from SEER schools, and SEER schools are the schools where you go. You're like a Navy SEAL, and they torture you and they do all this stuff to to prepare you for if you're captured. So he goes there, and for example, he goes to the Air Force one, and the Air Force one and the Navy one have very different ideas about how to torture people.
Okay.
So he goes to the one, and he tells us. I was like, "What was it like?" He was like, "Yeah, well, for example, one time." They came in the middle of the night, and they try to make it as real as possible. They came in the middle of the night, and they dragged me out of bed, and they put me in a hole in the ground, naked, and then they put a metal plate over the hole, and then they inserted a water hose, and they filled the hole with water, and water got higher and higher and higher and higher and higher, and what I didn't know is that right behind my head, there was a drain pipe. So the water couldn't go any higher than my nose. But I didn't know that. All I knew it was getting higher and higher and higher. And all I could think of was, maybe they won't kill me, but I don't know, maybe they will. So it was a moment when he began to seriously question whether he was going to survive. Anyway, that's the kind of stuff they do to each other. And he gets but they didn't, the Air Force guys don't believe in waterboarding because they think it works so well, why would you, if you train Air Force people on waterboarding, they're going to give up. And the point of the training is that you don't give up. So you don't want to do the thing that so humiliates them that they'll think once they're captured it's pointless, right? The Navy guys think, no, it's really useful to show you the full range of bad things. So, which by the way, you could spend a lot of time just sort of unpacking the significance of this distinction between the philosophies of the Navy and the Air Force. But anyway, so he's Air Force, and he isn't done waterboarding, and he calls the Navy guys and says, is it going to work against Al-Qaeda? And they go, totally. So he's at the black site, and he and his buddy decide that what they'll do is they'll try waterboarding on each other to see how bad it is. And so they try it on each other, and they're like, oh, it's bad. And then they call Washington, and they say, we want to do this thing called waterboarding. And the Justice Department has to okay it. So they're like, well, what's that? And they try to explain it, like, no, let's send some attorneys down to the black site to figure out what it is. So he's like, one day, this guy, by the way, his name is James Mitchell, an enormously charming, you'll see if you listen to the audiobook, you're interested. So he says, what happens, so one day, they're at the black site, like in Poland or whatever the hell it is, and two young DOJ attorneys show up from Washington. Yeah. And a woman and a man. And you can imagine the woman in like the big bow tie and the guy in like his Brooks Brothers suit. And they're just like, they're probably 3 years out of law school. They show up in Poland, and James Mitchell's like, all right, we're going to waterboard you. So they strapped him to the gurney, and they waterboard them. And he's like, and then, we did it. And then I said, well, what did they say when they got out of the... And he said, the woman turned to him and said, man, that sucked. That's why we had waterboarding.
Malcolm Gladwell breaks down waterboarding, you guys. Come on. Give it up.
But
fascinating. Well, let's go to some questions. You want to take some questions from the audience? See what some people...
Ted is going to announce them.
All right, we have time for a few questions. Malcolm, if you had 10,000 hours to dedicate to a new craft, what would you choose and why?
10,000 hours.
To a new craft... I don't know. I guess I read so many thrillers. I'd maybe want to reinvent myself as a fiction writer. Is that boring?
So you would still want to write? Yeah, exactly.
But maybe I should do something more adventurous. Maybe but no, I think maybe I'd want to write. I have ideas for thrillers that I've never pursued because I think it's really hard to master writing dialogue.
You could take 10,000 hours to figure out how to beat LeBron in a race. You know,
Trust me, I've said
is
more
that
than-
10,000 hours? Is that bullshit? Or, I mean, is that...
Well,
come on.
it's
That's bullshit, right?
frequently when you write
I
something.
mean, now you look back, you go, I can't believe they bought that shit, right?
No. So, one of the things that happens
10,000.
when you write a book
Yes.
is that people are overly enthusiastic in their interpretation of some
Right.
of your ideas.
Yes.
So I presented 10,000 hours in a very narrow sense. I was talking about, computer programming, chess,
Right.
like serious cognitive tasks. But people were like, "Oh, this applies to, playing power forward in the NBA." No, it doesn't.
Right.
It doesn't apply to anything. It applies to like being a computer programmer, a world-class computer programmer, and playing and being in the Beatles. But it doesn't apply to like, so I will. It doesn't. The notion of 10,000 hours, as was popularly explained, had nothing
Got
to do
it.
with me. And there were articles written in which they would talk about my theory,
Yes, right.
not my theory, A,
Right.
and B, to the extent that it is my theory, what you're describing bears nothing, nothing in common with.
I understand. Okay, it's bullshit. All right. We're...
Malcolm, you've been very critical of philanthropy in higher education.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true, yes.
What is wrong about it, and how might it be different or better?
Oh my God, where to start?
You did a whole pod episode on this, I believe, right?
Endlessly thought about this.
Yeah.
Well, it's so kind of basic common sense. You have two choices. You can give money to schools that need money, or you can give money to schools that don't need money.
Right.
My advice
Right.
is give money to schools that need money.
Yes,
Why?
I agree.
Why? Because they need money,
Yeah.
right? And every time I meet someone who's just given like, $1 million to Harvard,
Yeah.
I say, you could, first of all, are you walking into a Louis Vuitton store and giving them money too? Because that's essentially
Right.
the same thing, right? Do you feel like it needs a little sprucing up around the edges? Would you like to open a division of the Louis Vuitton store with your name on it? Like the Larry Wilmore School of, handbags?
Wait, are you dressing me down? Like
Yeah.
I'm giving it to her?
You probably have some, and it always is that.
Cal Poly doesn't ask me for money. No.
You're
They accept the fact that this is the best it's going to get.
Why not? You're loaded.
No, I'm not loaded. You're the one. These books sell like hotcakes, man.
I actually had a conversation. I figured this out once so I would encourage any of you who would like to read the financial statements of Princeton University. And what's fascinating about them is Princeton University so you have an endowment, and what you do if you're a university is you do a draw from the endowment every year.
Right.
And you typically might take 5% of the endowment out every year. And if you make 7%, then you keep the extra 2 in there and the endowment slightly grows. Or if times are hard, you'll draw 10% and your endowment will dip a little and you'll try and raise some more.
Sure.
Princeton has so much money in its endowment that it tries as hard as it can to take the maximum amount, and still that number is such a tiny fraction of the whole that every year, regardless of what Princeton does, their endowment gets bigger. So there's no scenario in which they don't make more money in a given year. They have the school is tiny. They've already spent all the money on, they are running out of things to spend. If you walked around Princeton, they're literally at their wits' end about what to spend money on, right? And so the endowment, if they raised $0 next year and took the maximum amount out of the endowment would still grow. Okay, that's their financial situation. Right? Do they still raise money? Absolutely. So at what point do you say, well, I don't understand, what's the money being raised?
It doesn't make sense. Yeah.
And so I sat down next to a woman who managed their endowment, and I said, oh, that's really interesting that you manage your endowment. And I said, I read the financial statements, and my understanding of them is that you guys could fall asleep for the next 50 years and your endowment would double.
That's true.
Have you ever thought about doing more productive work? And she was like, that's not true. I was like, well, I think it's true. And we had a kind of argument at the dinner
I
party.
love these little snits that you get in with
I
these
get in
people.
snits.
I think it's awesome.
I get
man.
in snits. I like to pick a fight.
Yeah.
And And then she emailed me the next day and said, I actually checked and you're right.
Yeah.
All right.
Do you think some of these, to go off of this question, do you think, a lot of politicians are talking about free college and all that kind of stuff, but they always, the idea is for the government to pay for it. But it seems to me there's a lot of private institutions that could just be giving college away for free right now. Do you think we'll see some of that maybe?
I don't think the issue is, that's not the fix. So I'm now.
It's not the overall fix, but.
No, I'm now, I really, really, really do think that the wealthier, so if you think about it, the Ivy League institutions plus Stanford have a combined endowment of $140 billion.
Billion.
Yeah, $140 billion, and they
That's
educate
crazy.
100,000 students.
Yeah.
So at a certain point, I think those institutions have the obligation, since they are really good at fundraising, they should just fundraise for everybody else,
Yeah.
right? Like, I don't see, why is it, if you give $1 million to Harvard, why can't Harvard say the best use of your money is for someone other than Harvard? Why can't Harvard go to you and say, Mr. Schwartzman, your $100 million would do a lot of good at a community college in our community, and we'd like that. I don't understand why that argument is. People always roll their eyes, but that argument, I'm sorry, is not impossible. If the president of Harvard said to their number one donor, "Thank you, I really appreciate your generosity. I would like to make the best use of this money I can, and I have to tell you the best use is not on this campus." I don't think the people would. I once found, and it never happened, but I learned that there was a guy who had someone I knew was on the Harvard board. Told me there was a guy, a really rich guy.
I love how you just distance yourself from
No,
it.
no, but I don't want to give it. I don't want to get into
Sure.
that. I learned that there was a guy on the Harvard board who was really rich, who really wanted to give like hundreds of millions of dollars to de-renovate the Harvard football stadium. In other words, they had the football stadium, which was like a classic, traditional, blah, blah. They renovated it to make it look modern. And this guy was like, you know what? I'd like to take it back to before.
It's like, nah, I don't like that. That's amazing. Such a waste.
It's fantastic.
Largesse. Okay, what else?
And our final question for the
Oh,
evening.
final question.
Final question. Of all the interviews you've completed in your career for your various books and podcasts, which interview and with whom had the biggest impact on you personally?
Come on. Malcolm. These people. Riverside, come on, man, give it up. These people.
No, I'm not. You conducted this interview. I didn't conduct this interview.
I know, but with the audience, this is.
Well, so one that was done with me, clearly, Larry. One that I did with someone else.
What was the question? One he's done?
Correct. One he has
I
done.
love how you're going out of your way to make this about you.
Yeah. Trying to get some love. I know how snitty you get, so I'm just trying to get some Malcolm love.
I'm actually rarely snitty. I am very well behaved. I occasionally wander outside the lines, but only
Yes.
very occasionally.
Yeah.
My
but your
Twitter,
snittiness is always entertaining, though, I have to say.
my Twitter is like cats.
Yeah.
It's like there's no harshness going on my Twitter.
Well, let me ask you this, because people kind of pounced on you a bit last year. Remember the whole New Yorker thing event happened?
They didn't pounce on me.
Well, it seemed like they were pouncing on you.
It's like my view of Twitter is there's like 8 people
Uh-huh.
who live, I don't know where they live, like in the
Yeah.
suburbs of Cleveland.
Right.
And they're very angry with their life. And they go on a variety of
Yes.
Twitter sites, whatever they are, every day, and just post lots of nasty things. But it's
Sure.
not a lot, we think because they're so prolific
Yeah.
that there's a lot of them out there. I think there's
I don't
8
think
of
it's
them.
allowed either. I agree.
I think
with
it's
you.
8 of them.
It just 8 is a pretty good number. I like
Yeah,
that number.
yeah. I
Let
want you
me
to know
ask. Let me ask you this to back on that. Do you have a favorite book? I know your most recent one usually can feel like your favorite, but is there anyone that sticks out in your mind that you just really always kind of look at fondly, or do you just forget those once you're done?
Well, there's the standard answer people give, which I'm not going to give, but I'll tell you what the standard answer
Okay.
is, which is, my books are like my children. I like them all
I
equally.
rarely visit them again, right? Oops, I've told too much. Right.
By the way, growing up, it was an article of faith that if parents had a favorite, they would never own up to it. So when I was a kid, you would observe family, your own family and other families, and it would be clear there was big differences among the siblings in lovability, but no one ever even raised the notion that parents might favor one over another. And then lately, I've realized that in the 21st century, apparently parents seem to be much less concerned about this. And I know people who openly will say, well, she's my favorite.
Yeah. I mean, when it's so obvious, what are they going to do?
How many do you have?
I have 2 kids. No.
Do you have a favorite?
No, I do not have a favorite. I don't.
Come
I don't
on.
have a favorite.
Come
I
on.
don't. I wouldn't lie to you. I don't have a favorite.
Really?
I would tell you if I had a favorite. No, if one of them was rotten, I would definitely have a favorite.
What would they say?
No, they would agree with me.
They would say,
yeah, absolutely.
Dad's totally even-handed.
Completely. Now, I come from a family where there were some favorites, you know, and that was pretty obvious for a while, and sometimes that would
You were
shift,
not the favorite.
No, I was never the
That's
favorite.
why you're a comic.
Although I think I might be my mom's favorite now, but that's because I pay for everything. That's a whole different story.
A late surge in
But
the
I know
rankings.
what you mean. But
You were like,
there's definitely schisms that are caused when they're favorites. But we're talking about books. Your books aren't going to be affected by being a favorite.
do I have a favorite?
I'm just calling bullshit on your answer right now. Because it's a book. We're talking about a book.
You know, you
like
never...
Blink is going to go, well, I mean, if I'm not the favorite.
No, you can't, your favorite can't be your first one, right? Like, the first one was written in the late 90s. There is nothing I thought or did or wore in the late 90s that I would endorse today. Like, it's just not, no part of Malcolm in the late 90s is a good idea.
Yeah.
And I think all of us feel that way. Who would stand behind their late 90s self in this day and age?
Trump?
Yeah, that's about it. What were you doing in the late 90s?
I was doing a little show called The PJs. It was a little animated show with Eddie Murphy on television.
Would you stand behind your late 90s self?
Completely. We had a crackhead on the show. Are you kidding me? Absolutely. Still hasn't been done on television. We actually had a line on the show. Well, gotta go. Crack don't smoke and show. Can't do it. You can't do that line today on TV. Can't do it. Cannot do it. I stand by my late 90s self. That's all I'm asking of you, Malcolm. That's all. Okay, we could do this all night, you guys. But should we answer one more? One more for the road.
One more.
Do we got one more? One more, you guys? One more.
So,
One more, and then we'll wrap it up. How about
a final question, Malcolm. What advice would you give? This actually was one of the questions that came in as a parent in here who teaches kindergarten. Her husband teaches high school. Okay. What is the best advice you would give them to give a kindergarten student and a high school student?
Advice in the realm of, what do you
Life,
mean?
what
Just
to
life
read?
advice?
Anything.
Do you have life advice for? Are you sure this is a question for this show? Oh, that was our child psychology show last night, Larry. Sorry.
I was going to say,
Kind of an odd question, but
do I have life
do you
advice?
give advice to people? Are you asked to give advice at all? Or?
Not really. I don't think of my. When I think of my own experience, I don't know whether it lends
Sure.
itself to. I wouldn't. Would I want someone to follow my career path? I don't think so. But advice, leave. I mean, I always think that if you're young and in America, you should leave America. I don't mean permanently. I don't mean leave it in anger.
Go
I mean,
visit places.
you should live somewhere else for a while, and you know, your appreciation for this country will grow if you go somewhere dysfunctional.
Sure.
And that's a very because I think a lot of people are on. As an outsider, and also as a child. So I grew up my mom is a Jamaican immigrant, and I grew up in the family of in the world of Jamaican immigrants in America and Canada. And there are many, 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 many Jamaican immigrants. And if you grew up in the world of Jamaican immigrants, they're all they left Jamaica when Jamaica was at its craziness in the 70s. And that reference point in their head, in their mind, about how crazy things were in the 70s in Jamaica, meant they were always happy to be here. And no amount of craziness and dysfunction in America can possibly dislodge the notion of how crazy things were elsewhere.
Yeah.
And that's a really, to talk to Americans today, you would think that this country, was on its last legs. It is, by the way, still just about the best place to live in the world, right? One guy can't screw that up. And if you've forgotten that, you should go somewhere that isn't working well and reacquaint yourself about what dysfunction really looks like. So that's my advice would be, buy a plane ticket, go somewhere that isn't working really well, and get some healthy perspective in your own
Get an appreciation
country.
for this country. What a nice way to end. And go talk to strangers. How about that? Malcolm Gladwell, Talking to Strangers. Go buy the book, everybody. Thanks, Malcolm. That was awesome, man. Thanks.